I called off my eldest daughter's wedding because I found out she was ashamed of me. The realization hit me like an invisible punch when I accidentally glanced at her phone. Dad can't talk at the reception. You know how he is. His accent, his manners. Better if he just hands over the check and stays in the background. These words, written by my own daughter Allison to her fiancé, pierced my chest like shards of ice. 58 years building an empire from nothing, giving her everything I never had, only for my very presence to now be an embarrassment. I stood there, phone in hand, as the world I thought I knew silently crumbled around me. I took a deep breath. I said nothing. I left the phone exactly as I had found it. I returned to my study. I poured a glass of aged bourbon and stared out at the Atlanta skyline from my penthouse in Midtown. The city lights glittered, indifferent to my pain. I took a slow sip, savoring the burn down my throat. Money buys education, but not dignity, my father used to say. Never had those words resonated with such profound truth. That same evening, during our family dinner, I watched Allison with new eyes. Her studied elegance, her speech peppered with sophisticated, almost theatrical phrases, that slightly condescending look when I shared an anecdote from my early days. When did my daughter become a stranger? At what point did pride in her father transform into shame? The decision began to form within me, quiet but firm. I would not be humiliated by my own blood. My name is Robert Rob Harris. I was born in a remote town in rural Tennessee that barely appears on a map. My father was a logger. My mother waitressed at a roadside diner. At 15, I arrived alone in Atlanta with $50 in my pocket and the determination to never go hungry again. I slept in the Greyhound bus terminal for a week until I landed a job as a dishwasher in a Greasy Spoon cafe. 3 years later, I was managing the place. By 25, I bought my first restaurant with a loan no one thought I could repay. By 30, I owned 5 diners. By 40, a national chain. Today, the Harris Restaurant Group includes 30 high-end Southern and New American restaurants, a line of gourmet sauces and preserves exported to 12 countries, and 3 boutique inns in premium destinations like Napa Valley and Charleston. Forbes magazine included me in its list of top entrepreneurs last year. Not bad for someone who came to the city with a duffel bag and a thick accent. My wife, Margaret Maggie, comes from an educated middle-class family. We met when she was working as a hostess at my second restaurant. Her family initially opposed our relationship. "He's crude. He lacks refinement," her mother said. "Nouveau riche without culture," her father added. They were right about one thing. I did lack refinement. My speech was colored by the strong accent of my home region. My manners were rudimentary, my formal education virtually non-existent. But Maggie saw beyond that. She saw my determination, my natural intelligence, my hunger to succeed. We married when I was 28 and she was 24. Her family eventually accepted me, especially when my financial success became undeniable. We had 2 daughters, Allison, now 32, and Paige, 29. We gave them everything: education at the best prep schools, international vacations, designer clothes, social connections I could only dream of at their age. While I worked 18-hour days, they grew up in a world of privilege that I built, brick by hard-won brick, with my calloused hands. I always knew there was a gap between us. My daughters grew up speaking perfect, unaccented English. They attended Ivy League and European universities. They moved naturally in elevated social circles. I, despite my success, remained in essence the same boy from rural Tennessee. I hired private tutors to soften my diction. I took etiquette classes, learned the basics of several languages, and read voraciously to compensate for my lack of formal schooling. But some things never change. The accent that reveals my origins, certain Southern colloquialisms that slip out, that direct, no-nonsense way of being that characterizes those who have fought their way up from the bottom. I naively believed my daughters appreciated that authenticity, that they understood their current privilege was the result of my apparent lack of polish, that they viewed the path their father had traveled with pride, not shame. The first sign that something was wrong appeared at Allison's engagement party 6 months earlier. Her fiancé, Grant Montgomery, belongs to one of those prominent New England families, with double-barrel names and genealogical charts dating back centuries. A corporate lawyer educated at Yale, with a condo on the Upper East Side and impeccable political connections. A good match by traditional social standards. During the party, I noticed how Allison strategically kept me away from Grant's parents. Every time I tried to join their conversation, my daughter would magically appear to rescue me, claiming someone else urgently needed to speak with me. At first, I attributed it to the natural tension of the event. Later, I began to notice a pattern. In the wedding planning meetings, Allison insisted that I only handle the financial aspects. "You're the business genius, Dad. Leave the social details to Mom and me." When I suggested a casual Tennessee BBQ station during the cocktail hour as a nod to my roots, I saw that look, a mix of horror and barely disguised embarrassment. "It's a black tie wedding, Dad, not a cookout," she responded with a strained smile. Each small exclusion, each seemingly innocent comment, accumulated like imperceptible drips, until I found those messages on her phone, accidentally looking for the florist's number she had saved when she asked me to confirm a detail. Other messages revealed more. "Talk Dad out of wearing that huge turquoise belt buckle he thinks is elegant. Please make sure someone vets his speech beforehand. You know how he gets, rambling on about the diner in his early days. I wish he understood that his rags to riches stories don't impress the Montgomery family. They just make them uncomfortable." My Allison, the girl who once sat on my knee proudly while I told her how I scrubbed pots 16 hours a day to open our first restaurant, was now ashamed of that very story. The same story that had financed her education in Switzerland, her summers in Europe, her Soho apartment, her privileged lifestyle. Wedding preparations continued over the following weeks. I quietly observed every interaction with new eyes, noticing details that had previously gone unnoticed. How Allison subtly corrected my pronunciation in front of the Montgomerys. How she avoided mentioning my humble origins or my lack of formal education. How she had created a sanitized version of her father. Not the dishwasher turned entrepreneur, but the visionary restaurant mogul who revolutionized contemporary Southern dining. It wasn't entirely false, but it wasn't authentically me either. It was a socially acceptable version, stripped of all the grit, sweat, and hardship that had forged my character. One afternoon, barely 3 weeks before the wedding, Allison came to my office to discuss the final payment to the exclusive resort in the Hamptons where the event would take place. 500 guests, the cream of East Coast society, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, an ostentatious display that would cost more than I earned in my first 10 combined years of work. "Dad, we need to confirm some program details," she said, checking her tablet. "We thought maybe it would be better if Grant's father gave the main speech at the reception. You know, he's an experienced orator and knows most of the guests." I stared at her, waiting for her to continue digging her own grave. "And of course, you could say a few words during the private family dinner the night before," she added quickly, "where we'll be in a more intimate setting." "More intimate," I repeated, savoring the irony, "where my Tennessee accent and my nouveau riche manners won't embarrass the Montgomery family with my vulgar presence." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about, Dad? It's not that. It's just that—" "It's exactly that, Allison. Don't insult my intelligence by adding lies to the shame." I pulled out my phone and showed her screenshots of her own messages, a precaution I had taken, anticipating this moment. The color completely drained from her face. "You went through my phone," she whispered, indignant, but mainly terrified. "Accidentally, looking for the florist's number, but that's irrelevant. The content is what matters." She recovered quickly. Another skill she inherited from me, the ability to adapt to a crisis. "Dad, you're misinterpreting everything. I just wanted you to feel comfortable, without the pressure of having to impress everyone. The Montgomerys are very traditional, very protocol-oriented. So traditional that you'd prefer your father, who is paying for every dime of this extravagance, to stay in the shadows so as not to offend their aristocratic sensibilities with his vulgar presence." Tears began to well in her eyes. I couldn't tell if they were from shame for her actions or simply for being caught. "It's not fair for you to put it like that. I love you, Dad. You're my hero. I just wanted everything to be perfect. Perfect according to the Montgomery standards, not yours, not mine." I stood up and walked to the window, gazing at the city I had conquered despite every obstacle. You know what the saddest part is, Allison? That you're ashamed of who I am when you should be the one most proud of my journey. That you're ashamed precisely of what gave you all the privileges you enjoy. I'm not ashamed of you, she weakly protested. Your own words contradict you. Just hand over the check and stay in the background. Pretty clear, don't you think? She fell silent, trapped in her own contradiction. All my life I've fought for respect, I continued. Not the kind you buy with money, but the real kind. The kind earned through integrity, hard work, and keeping your word. I thought I had achieved it, but I find that where it matters most, in my own family, I'm still seen as an upstart, an intruder in the refined world I myself financed. I turned to face her directly. The wedding is canceled. The expression on her face went from sadness to disbelief, and then to sheer panic in a matter of seconds. You can't do that. Everything is paid for. The guests have RSVP'd the Montgomerys. The Montgomerys will survive the disappointment, I'm sure. As for the money, consider it a costly but necessary lesson for both of us. But I love Grant. You can't ruin my life because of your hurt pride. Those words, your hurt pride, revealed how deeply she failed to understand what was at stake. This isn't about pride, Allison. This is about dignity, respect, fundamental values that I, evidently, failed to instill in you. She collapsed onto the sofa, openly sobbing now. Please, Dad, we can fix this. I'll talk to Grant, to his parents. I'll explain it was a misunderstanding. You'll explain that you're not really ashamed of your father? That you weren't trying to hide me like an uncomfortable family secret? You'll lie, just like you've been lying to me. Her sobs intensified. I felt a pang of paternal pain, the instinct to comfort my daughter. But something stronger held me back, a principle I could not, must not compromise. The decision is final, Allison. You can marry Grant whenever you want, but it will not be with my participation or my funding. If I am so unworthy of figuring prominently in your wedding, I will be consistent and withdraw completely. She stood up abruptly, her sadness morphing into anger. Another inherited trait. You can't do this to me. You'll ruin my reputation, my relationship with the Montgomerys. Everyone will talk. Let them talk. The ones who matter will understand. The ones who don't understand don't matter. It's my life, my future. And it's my dignity, my self-respect. The only thing that truly belongs to me and that no one can take away, except myself, if I allow this kind of humiliation. She stormed out of my office, slamming the door. I didn't try to stop her. I knew the hard part was yet to come, explaining to Maggie, confronting the Montgomery family, enduring the inevitable social scandal. But a strange peace washed over me, the peace of someone acting in accordance with their deepest principles. That night when I returned home, Maggie was waiting for me in the living room. Her expression told me everything I needed to know. Allison had already talked to her. Is it true you canceled the wedding? She asked, her voice strained but controlled. Yes. Rob, please, reconsider. Allison is devastated. The Montgomerys are furious. It's an unnecessary scandal. I showed her the messages. She read them in silence, her expression subtly changing with each line. I didn't know, she finally murmured. What didn't you know, Maggie? That our daughter is ashamed of her roots? Of me? Or did you just not want to see it? She sat down slowly, processing the information. Maggie had always been the bridge between my world and the high society we now frequented, the cultural mediator, the translator of implicit social codes that I sometimes missed. I always tried to get the girls to value your background, your struggle, she finally said. Maybe I failed too. Her admission surprised me. I had expected resistance, arguments to reconsider, not this self-critical reflection. We both failed. Then, I conceded, sitting down beside her, we gave them so much that they forgot the value of effort. We made the path so easy that they scorned the hardship I faced. She took my hand in hers. Is there no other solution? Does it have to be so drastic as canceling the wedding? If it were just an isolated comment, maybe not. But it's a pattern, Maggie, a pattern of shame and concealment that's been growing for years. The wedding is just the culmination point. She remained silent, acknowledging the truth of my words. What happens now? She finally asked. Now, Allison faces the consequences of her actions, and we face the consequences of our decisions as parents. The following days were a whirlwind of crisis. Allison temporarily moved in with her sister Paige, refusing to speak to me. The Montgomerys demanded an explanation, which I provided with a frankness that stunned them. I showed them the messages, explained my position, and clarified that my decision had nothing to do with their son, but with the respect I owed myself. Grant's mother, surprisingly, was the first to show understanding. "Mr. Harris, if my son were ashamed of me in that way, I would have done the same thing," she said with a dignity that revealed why the Montgomery family had maintained their status for generations. It wasn't just money or name, it was also principles. The father, more pragmatic, tried to negotiate. "We can reschedule, make protocol adjustments, ensure you have the prominence you deserve as the father of the bride." "It's not about protocol," I replied. "It's about the underlying attitude. That's not fixed with superficial adjustments." Rumors began to circulate in our social circles that I had had a breakdown, that I had discovered something dark about the Montgomerys, that it was an act of vengeance against my daughter for some imaginary grievance. No one seemed to consider the possibility that I was simply defending my dignity. Paige came to see me a week later. Of my two daughters, she had always been the most reflective, the least concerned with social appearances. "Dad," she began, sitting across from me in my study, "I've talked a lot with Allison. She's heartbroken, but she's also thinking." "About what?" "About how she's treated you, about how all of us have treated you, really." That captured my full attention. "Go on." "I think we never fully grasped what it meant for you to come from where you came from and get to where you are. We took it for granted, as if it were normal." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope, not for the wedding, which remained firmly canceled in my mind, but for the possibility that something good could emerge from this crisis. "And what does your sister think about it?" "She's going through stages. First was rage, then denial. Now she's starting to understand. Not completely, but she's on her way." "And Grant?" "Surprisingly, he's been very supportive. He said he always admired your success story and that it was Allison who insisted on downplaying your origins. He wants to talk to you." I considered this information. Was it possible I had misjudged my daughter's fiancé? That the shame came primarily from Allison, uninfluenced by him? "I'll receive him," I decided, "but that doesn't change my decision about the wedding." Paige nodded, understanding the firmness of my position. "There's something else you should know, Dad. This incident has sparked important conversations in the family. Conversations we probably should have had years ago." "What kind of conversations? About values? About gratitude? About respect?" "Mom gathered everyone, aunts, cousins, even the maternal grandparents, and she spoke very clearly about how your work and sacrifice built everything we have." That night, reflecting on the conversation with Paige, I felt a mix of conflicting emotions: pain over Allison's betrayal, disappointment in myself for not having detected and corrected these attitudes sooner, but also a strange sense of liberation, as if canceling the wedding had broken not only a social event, but also invisible chains that bound me to false expectations, to a diluted version of myself that I had been gradually tolerating. Grant came to see me 2 days later. I received him in my office, that space that reflected my true essence, a blend of contemporary luxury with custom-made furniture from Tennessee artisans, indigenous art alongside cutting-edge technology, my heritage and my present coexisting without contradiction. "Mr. Harris," he began, visibly nervous but direct. "First, I want you to know that I love your daughter, and I still want to marry her, with or without the canceled wedding." I nodded, appreciating his candor. "Second, I want to personally apologize, not for what Allison wrote, those are her words and she must take responsibility for them, but for not having intervened when I perceived this attitude in her, for not having clearly told her that I deeply admired your story and was not ashamed of it." His words seemed sincere, his gaze direct and unwavering. "And why didn't you?" I asked. "Cowardice, I suppose, not wanting to create conflict, assuming it was a family issue that would resolve itself." His honesty was refreshing. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't minimizing his responsibility. I appreciate your sincerity, Grant, and your courage in coming here directly. There's something else I want to tell you, he continued. My family deeply respects your decision. My mother especially said it showed a character rarely seen today. That surprised me. I had expected resentment, not respect, from the Montgomerys. Appearances are deceiving, Mr. Harris. My family has old names and connections, yes, but also solid values. My grandfather started as a farmhand before becoming a foreman and eventually an owner. We never hid that. On the contrary, it's a source of family pride. This revelation subtly changed my perspective. Perhaps I had projected my own prejudices onto the Montgomery family, assuming they were snobs based on their current social position. Then why did Allison feel the need to hide me, to minimize me? That's a question she needs to answer. But if you permit an observation, Allison has always desperately sought social acceptance, not from my family specifically, but in general, as if she constantly needed external validation. His words struck a chord in me, a realization that had been forming beneath the surface. Perhaps the problem wasn't simply ingratitude or shame. Perhaps it was something more complex, more rooted in insecurities I hadn't fully perceived. As Grant left, he promised to respect any decision I made, but also asked me to consider that, despite everything, he still wanted to be part of our family. Not for your money or position, Mr. Harris, but because I admire the values of work and honesty that you represent, values I hope to help strengthen in Allison, if you give me the chance. That night, as I shared the details of this conversation with Maggie, a new perspective began to form. We always saw Allison as the most secure of our daughters, Maggie reflected, but maybe we confused arrogance with security. Perhaps her need for status and approval comes precisely from a deep insecurity, I added, recognizing my part in the dynamic, always highlighting my humble origins, my lack of formal education as a contrast to what I was providing them. Do you think she was trying to distance herself from that? Not out of shame of you, but out of her own insecurities about genuinely belonging to these social circles? Maggie's question opened a new dimension in my understanding of the problem. It didn't justify Allison's actions, but it offered a context I hadn't fully considered. The following days were spent in deep reflection. The wedding remained officially canceled, but a crucial conversation loomed. A conversation that I hoped could lead not to a simple superficial reconciliation, but to a deeper understanding between father and daughter. An understanding based not on silenced shame or hurt dignity, but on bare truth and the possibility of renewed, authentic respect. 2 weeks after the cancellation, the media storm began to subside. The society pages had exhausted their speculations, calls from concerned friends spaced out, and a new political scandal had captured the attention of social circles. But within our family, the real process was just beginning. Allison finally requested to see me. We agreed to meet in a neutral place, the Atlanta Botanical Garden, a space we frequented when she was a teenager, and we had talks about her future. The symbolism was not lost on either of us. I watched her approach along the path of blooming crepe myrtles. She moved with that studied elegance I had always admired and financed. Ballet lessons since age 5, modeling sessions in her teens, image consulting in her adulthood. She was dressed with calculated simplicity, designer jeans, a silk blouse, minimal but evidently expensive accessories. The perfect picture of casual sophistication that only true money can achieve. We sat on a bench facing the pond. The initial silence was deafening for two people accustomed to filling space with words. Finally, she was the one who spoke first. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Dad. I always have time for you, Allison. That has never changed." She nervously fidgeted with her bracelet, a graduation gift from me, platinum with Tennessee River pearl inlays. Irony upon irony. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks," she began, her voice controlled but trembling at the edges. "About my actions, my words, my attitudes toward you." I remained silent, allowing her to continue her difficult confession without interruption. What I wrote was unforgivable. I have no excuses, although I do have explanations that might help to understand, not justify. "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, though my father's heart yearned to simply hug her and forget the whole affair. I've always lived under a giant shadow, Dad. Yours. The great Rob Harris, the man who conquered Atlanta with tenacity and vision, the entrepreneur who revolutionized Southern dining, the success story everyone admires. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I grew up hearing those stories. How you slept in the bus terminal, how you worked 18 hours a day, how you negotiated your first loan with nothing but your word as collateral. Stories of a giant, Dad, an unreachable giant. This perspective surprised me. I had always shared my experiences as lessons in perseverance, never with the intention of setting impossible expectations. Alongside those stories of greatness, she continued, was the constant reminder of our origins, your accent that never completely disappeared, your Southern idioms, your insistence on maintaining connections with the town, with our roots. And that embarrassed you? I asked, genuinely trying to understand. Not at first. At first I was proud. I boasted to my school friends that my dad had built everything from scratch, that we weren't like their old money, inherited privilege families. I remembered that stage, Allison at 12, proudly taking me to school events, introducing me with overflowing pride. What changed? She sighed deeply. I changed. Or rather, my environment changed my perspective. In prep school, when I started socializing with old money families, I noticed how some people looked at you, at us, with that subtle condescension of someone who tolerates the nouveau riche, but never truly considers them part of the circle. Her eyes slightly welled up. And instead of defending our right to be there, I started distancing myself from what caused those looks. I started to be ashamed of what should have been my greatest pride. Why did we never talk about this? Because admitting it would confirm my own weakness, my lack of character. I preferred to construct this persona, this Allison Harris International, educated, sophisticated, who naturally belonged to these circles. And that fictional person couldn't have a father who said, "fixin' to" instead of "about to," or who preferred a plate of biscuits and gravy to foie gras. The raw honesty of her admission plunged us both into contemplative silence. The water lilies floated serenely in the pond, oblivious to our human complexities. With Grant and his family, she finally continued, I felt that pressure multiplied. Not because they exerted it directly, but because I had idealized them as the embodiment of that world I desperately wanted to belong to completely. A world where lineage matters more than merit. An illusory world, I commented softly. Even the Montgomerys have humble beginnings, as Grant told me. Her eyes widened in surprise. You spoke with him? He came to see me, a young man with more integrity than I initially gave him credit for. Grant always admired your story. It was my insecurity that created this impossible situation. Another silence, this time more comfortable, as if the truth, once exposed, allowed a new kind of peace between us. You know what's most ironic, Dad? That in desperately trying to fit into that world, I betrayed the values you instilled in me, the very values that allowed you to build everything we have. I took her hand, noticing it was trembling slightly. Allison, you made a painful mistake. You hurt me deeply, but I also understand better now the pressures and contradictions you've faced. I don't deserve your understanding, she said, tears now flowing freely. What I wrote was awful. Yes, it was, I agreed, without sugarcoating the truth. But perhaps we needed this crisis to have the conversation we should have had years ago, about identity, about values, about what truly matters. She looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in her since she was a child. The mask of sophistication completely melted, revealing the daughter I knew was there, beneath layers of insecurities and social expectations. What happens now, Dad? With us? With the wedding? It was the inevitable question, the one that had been implicitly floating in our conversation from the beginning. With us, Allison, a process of rebuilding begins. It won't be instantaneous or easy. Trust, once broken, takes time to heal. She nodded, accepting this reality without protest. As for the wedding, I continued, choosing my words carefully, I remained firm in my decision to cancel it as it was planned. Her face showed disappointment, but not surprise. However, I added, I am open to discussing an alternative, a different celebration based on authentic values, not social pretense. If you and Grant are interested in that kind of commitment, we can talk about it. Her eyes lit up slightly. Really? You'd give us that chance? It's not a frivolous decision, Allison. It would require fundamental changes in your perspective, not just words of repentance, but concrete actions that demonstrate a genuine shift in your attitude toward our origins, toward who we truly are. What kind of actions? That's something you'll have to discover for yourself. I can't dictate a path to authenticity. That would be contradictory. She nodded slowly, grasping the depth of the challenge I presented. It wasn't simply rearranging a wedding, but rearranging fundamental values. We said goodbye with a tentative hug, the first physical contact since the initial confrontation. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was an honest beginning, a foundation upon which we might build something more authentic than what we had before. On the drive back home, I reflected on our conversation. Allison's insecurities, though painful to hear, shed light on family dynamics I had overlooked. In my determination to give my daughters every opportunity I lacked, perhaps I had inadvertently created an impossible pressure, the pressure to navigate between two worlds without fully belonging to either. That night, I shared these thoughts with Maggie as we ate dinner on the terrace of our home in Buckhead. The city glittered at our feet, a constant reminder of the journey traveled. I always thought I was giving them wings, I confessed, but maybe, without realizing it, I was also giving them an invisible burden, the expectation to honor a legacy without the freedom to define their own. Maggie, always my emotional anchor, considered my words carefully. I think we all made mistakes, Rob. Me too. In my eagerness for the girls to integrate perfectly into these social circles, maybe I reinforced the message that their roots, our roots, were something to be polished, refined, almost hidden. Her admission surprised me. Maggie had always been the cultural mediator in our family, the one who translated implicit social codes, the one who softened my sometimes too direct frankness. You know what's most ironic, she continued, that now those same circles I worried so much about value your authenticity precisely, not despite your accent or your origins, but because of them, because they represent a genuine uninherited success story. She was right. In recent years, I had noticed a subtle shift in how I was perceived, no longer as the upstart who must be tolerated, but as the pioneer who must be respected. The authenticity that Allison viewed as an obstacle had become, ironically, my greatest social asset. Maybe that's the most valuable lesson in all of this, I reflected, that true social acceptance doesn't come from conforming to external expectations, but from faithfully being oneself. The following days brought interesting developments. Paige organized a family dinner where, for the first time in weeks, we all gathered. Maggie and me, Allison and Grant, Paige and her boyfriend, Carlos. The initial tension gradually dissipated as the conversation flowed, mainly guided by Paige's natural diplomacy. During dessert, Grant formally requested my blessing to continue his relationship with Allison, with or without the canceled wedding. His humility and clarity impressed me again. Mr. Harris, I love your daughter, not for her last name or social position, but for who she fundamentally is, including her flaws and contradictions, which we all have. And what do you think of this incident? I asked, carefully observing his reaction. I think it was painful but necessary, an opportunity for Allison and all of us to reflect on fundamental values that we sometimes take for granted in our privileged position. Allison, sitting beside him, maintained a fragile but dignified composure. I noticed she was wearing a simple silver locket I had given her for her 16th birthday, a piece she had saved but rarely worn in recent years. A small, symbolic gesture that didn't go unnoticed. We've been talking a lot, Dad, Allison intervened, about identity, about authenticity, about the kind of family we eventually want to form. And what conclusions have you reached? I asked, genuinely interested. That we don't want a relationship based on appearances or social expectations, that we want to build something with more solid foundations. Her words seemed sincere, her gaze direct and unwavering. The change was subtle but perceptible, a new determination, an honesty that was previously absent. As concrete evidence of this commitment, Grant added, we've decided to postpone any wedding plans for at least a year, time to work on ourselves individually and as a couple. This decision pleasantly surprised me. It wasn't what I expected, but it demonstrated a maturity I deeply respected. Also, Allison continued, I've decided to become more actively involved in the Harris Foundation. The Harris Foundation was a project I had started 5 years earlier to support young entrepreneurs from marginalized communities, mainly in rural Tennessee and Appalachia. Allison had always maintained an educated distance from the project, occasionally attending events but without real commitment. What motivated you to make that decision? I asked, curious about the authenticity of this sudden change. Brutal honesty, Dad. Shame. After our conversation at the botanical garden, I realized I've been wasting an invaluable opportunity to contribute meaningfully, to honor our origins not just with words but with concrete actions. The dinner concluded with a noticeably lighter atmosphere than when it had begun. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, nor a magical resolution of deeply rooted conflicts, but it was an honest start, a tentative commitment to authenticity that, if maintained, could lead to healthier and more meaningful relationships. In the following weeks, I carefully observed Allison's actions, looking for consistency more than grand gestures. To my surprise and cautious satisfaction, she seemed genuinely committed to her process of change. She began regularly visiting the foundation, not as the founder's daughter, but as an active collaborator, contributing her skills in marketing and public relations. She established a mentorship program, connecting young entrepreneurs with established professionals, leveraging precisely those social connections that had previously been a source of insecurity and pretense. More significantly, I saw her gradually reconnect with aspects of our cultural heritage that she had kept at a distance. She took classes in traditional Southern cooking with one of the chefs at our restaurants. She began incorporating handcrafted items from Appalachian artisans into her clothing and decor, not as exotic accessories, but as genuine recognition of her roots. Small changes, perhaps imperceptible to external observers, but profoundly significant to those of us who knew the full story. 3 months after the cancellation, Allison requested another private meeting with me. This time, she suggested we meet at the first diner I had opened, now converted into a kind of living museum of my entrepreneurial beginnings. The choice of location itself communicated a powerful message. I arrived early, taking time to tour the space that preserved original elements, along with photographs and memorabilia from those early years. The kitchen where I had worked 18 hours a day, the table where I had negotiated with suppliers when I could barely afford basic ingredients, the corner where Maggie manually kept the accounts, without software or assistance. Allison found me contemplating a particularly significant photograph, me at 26, at the opening, in a rented suit too big for me, and a smile of unwavering determination. That picture has always impressed me, she commented, startling me slightly. Especially your eyes. They have an intensity that's a little frightening. The intensity of someone who knows he has no safety net, I replied, turning to greet her with a hug. One failure meant returning to nothing. We sat at a private booth, where the manager, an employee who had been with me since those early days, personally served us aged bourbon. Thank you for coming, Dad, especially to this place, she said. It's a good reminder of where we come from, I replied. It knows what it costs to get here. She nodded, taking a small sip of bourbon before continuing. These months have been transformative, painful but necessary. I've noticed changes in you, I acknowledged, changes that seem to come from genuine reflection, not a superficial desire for reconciliation. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today, about authenticity and about the future. She pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. I didn't open it, waiting for her explanation. These are the preliminary designs for a project Grant and I have been developing, a cultural and culinary center in rural Tennessee, specifically in your hometown. This information completely surprised me. They had never shown particular interest in projects related to my origins. The concept is to create a space that celebrates traditional Southern cuisine, supports local artisans, and offers educational opportunities for young people in the region, combining cultural preservation with sustainable economic development. I opened the envelope, examining the architectural renderings and the preliminary business plan. It was an ambitious but carefully planned project, showing genuine respect for the local community rather than an extractive or folkloric approach. It's impressive, Allison, what inspired this idea. You, obviously, but also my own process of reconciling with our roots, realizing that our origins are not something to be downplayed or hidden, but to be actively celebrated and honored. She continued to explain specific aspects of the project: collaborations with traditional cooks, training programs for youth, spaces for local artisans, all designed with principles of sustainability and cultural respect. We're not looking for funding, she clarified, anticipating my natural question. Grant and I want to invest our own resources. It's important to us that it be our project, our contribution, not simply an extension of the Harris Group. This independence impressed me more than the project itself. It wasn't an attempt to win my approval or regain lost privileges. It was a declaration of maturity and personal commitment. We also wanted your blessing, not only as a father, but as someone who deeply knows the community. We don't want to impose an external vision, but to contribute respectfully. I felt a surge of paternal pride, different from anything I'd experienced before. Not the superficial pride in achievements or acquisitions, but something deeper, the recognition of genuine moral growth. You have my complete blessing, Allison, and more importantly, my respect for the integrity of this project. Her face lit up with a genuine smile, free of the tensions and social calculations that frequently accompanied it. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Dad, something personal. I'm listening. Grant and I still want to get married, not now, but when we're truly ready, as individuals and as a couple, without the social pressure or family expectations that contaminated our original plans. I nodded, appreciating the maturity of this approach. And when that time comes, we want a celebration that genuinely reflects who we all are, without shame, without pretense, without social masks. What do you have in mind? I asked, genuinely curious. A ceremony in rural Tennessee, in your hometown. Simple but meaningful, with traditional elements organically mixed with contemporary aspects. Authentic, just like you've always been. The proposal deeply moved me. It wasn't what I expected, certainly not what I would have suggested for fear of imposing my preferences. That it came from her, as a conscious and personal choice, made it infinitely more valuable. That would be an honor, Allison, for me and for our family, for the community that watched me grow up. We toasted with our bourbon, sealing not only this specific agreement but a new understanding between us, an understanding based on genuine mutual respect, not familial obligations or social expectations. Leaving the diner, we walked together through the streets of downtown Atlanta where my life in the city had begun, streets I had walked as a frightened but determined young man from the country, and that I now walked as a respected entrepreneur alongside my daughter. You know what I've learned in this whole process, Dad, she reflected as we looked at the illuminated skyline. That true respect, both toward others and toward yourself, cannot be manufactured or faked. It has to be earned and maintained with consistent actions, day after day. A costly choice, I replied, but invaluable. Costly but necessary, as you once said about your first bank loan. That she could quote my own words from my entrepreneurial beginnings, showed me that she really had been listening all these years, even when she seemed distant or ashamed. We all make mistakes, Allison. What defines our character isn't the absence of mistakes, but how we respond to them, how we turn them into opportunities for growth instead of patterns of failure. As we said goodnight that evening, I felt a peace that had been absent for months. It wasn't a perfect resolution of all our family conflicts. Those require time, consistency, continuous work from all involved. But it was a promising beginning, a solid foundation upon which to build more authentic and meaningful relationships. And perhaps, I reflected as I drove home, that was the true legacy I had always wanted to leave my daughters, not just successful companies or bulging bank accounts, but unbreakable values, the profound understanding that respect, both offered and received, must be based on authenticity, not pretense or external expectations. Canceling that wedding had been one of the most difficult decisions of my life, a decision that risked family relationships, social reputation, and the immediate happiness of people I deeply loved. But as I contemplated the path traveled since then, I was increasingly convinced that it had been the right decision, not out of hurt pride or a desire for control, but out of a fundamental principle that had guided my entire life. That personal dignity is non-negotiable, especially with those who should value it most. A year passed with the speed of a sigh. The Cultural Center project in rural Tennessee moved forward steadily under Allison and Grant's passionate direction. What began as a personal reconciliation initiative transformed into an emblematic project that revitalized the local economy and preserved traditions in danger of being lost. I watched with quiet pride as my eldest daughter grew, not only as an entrepreneur, but as a human being. She no longer desperately sought the approval of superficial social circles. She had found something more valuable, genuine respect based on real contributions, not appearances or last names. Paige, my youngest daughter, also experienced her own transformation. The family crisis had provoked honest conversations we never would have had under normal circumstances. One day, while we shared coffee in the office, she confessed to me, "I was always afraid of disappointing you, Dad, of not living up to the Harris name." "Why did you never mention it?" I asked, surprised by this revelation. "For the same reason Allison hid her shame. In this family, we build empires. We don't show vulnerability." Her words hit me with the force of a long-ignored truth. In my determination to give them strength and opportunities, perhaps I had inadvertently created a family culture where vulnerability was perceived as weakness, not authenticity. Maggie and I also evolved as a couple. Decades of marriage had created comfortable but sometimes superficial patterns. The crisis forced us to reconnect on a deeper level, to question dynamics we took for granted, to rediscover each other. "I always admired your authenticity," she confessed to me one night as we watched the sunset from our terrace. "Even though I sometimes tried to polish you for these social circles, I secretly envied your ability to remain true to yourself." "And I admired your adaptability," I replied, "your natural elegance in navigating worlds that were always foreign territory to me." We complemented each other precisely because we were different, not despite it. A simple yet profound truth we had almost forgotten in the routine of the years. Finally, the day we had been waiting for arrived. Not an ostentatious wedding at an exclusive resort, but an intimate celebration in my Tennessee hometown. The newly inaugurated Cultural Center served as the perfect backdrop, a symbol of tradition and modernity harmoniously coexisting, as our family had learned to do. The ceremony blended traditional Appalachian elements with contemporary touches. Allison wore a finely embroidered dress made by local artisans, complemented by silver jewelry designed specifically for the occasion. Grant wore a modern suit, but with subtle handcrafted details that honored the local culture without falling into superficial appropriation. The most significant thing was not the visual beauty of the event, but the palpable authenticity. There were no underlying tensions, no social pretense, no desperate attempts to impress, just genuine celebration, mutual respect, and shared joy. When it came time for my speech as the father of the bride, I felt a calm that contrasted sharply with the anxiety I would have experienced in the original version of this celebration. I didn't carry prepared notes or rehearsed phrases, only truths that had crystallized through our difficult but necessary family journey. Exactly 1 year ago, I began, I made the hardest decision of my life as a father. I canceled my eldest daughter's wedding because I discovered she was ashamed of me. An expectant silence fell over the guests. No one expected me to address so directly a topic many would consider taboo at a celebration. Today, I celebrate having made that decision, not out of pride, not out of control, but because it allowed us as a family to discover a fundamental truth, that authentic respect cannot be manufactured or bought. It must be earned through honesty, consistency, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. I looked directly at Allison, whose eyes shone with a mixture of emotion and deep understanding. My daughter taught me an invaluable lesson in this process, that our roots are not chains that bind us, but roots that nourish us. That our family history is not a narrative we should edit for social consumption, but a complex fabric of struggle, perseverance, and love that deserves to be honored in its entirety. I raised my glass in a toast to Allison and Grant. May you build a life based not on external expectations, but on shared values. May you never forget that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts or social connections, but in the authenticity of our relationships and the integrity of our actions. The celebration continued until dawn, with traditional music fused with contemporary rhythms, cuisine that honored ancestral recipes with modern techniques, and conversations that flowed freely among guests of diverse backgrounds, united by genuine connections, not social obligations. As I watched my family enjoy this hard-won moment of harmony, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us here, a journey that began with pain and betrayal, but led us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and the values that truly matter. Canceling that first wedding had seemed like an act of breaking, but it turned out to be an act of reconstruction. The difference between these two celebrations, the one originally planned and the one we were now enjoying, did not lie in the budget, the location, or the guest list. It lay in the reality, the authentic reality that permeated every aspect of this moment. As the sun began to rise over the Tennessee mountains, I felt a satisfaction that transcended business success or social recognition. The satisfaction of having defended fundamental principles, even when doing so was painful. Of having demanded authentic respect, not superficial deference. Of having created a space for my family to rediscover essential values we almost lost in our search for external acceptance. At 60, with a consolidated business empire and a family newly united on more authentic foundations, I understood that my true legacy would not be the company's properties or bank accounts. It would be this intensely lived lesson that personal dignity is non-negotiable, that respect must be earned with consistency, and that the most painful crises can be transformed into opportunities for growth when faced with courage and authenticity. And as I embraced my daughter on this momentous day, I knew with certainty that I had made the right decision that day when, with a torn heart but intact conviction, I canceled my eldest daughter's wedding because I found out she was ashamed of me. Thank you for joining me in this story of dignity and reconciliation. Perhaps you have seen yourself reflected in some of these characters, in their insecurities, their mistakes, or their moments of clarity. I invite you to reflect. What aspects of your identity have you minimized for social acceptance? Where have you compromised your authenticity? Remember that true respect, both toward yourself and toward others, must always be based on truth, not appearances, and that even the most painful crises can become catalysts for profound and meaningful growth.